Hey y'all, welcome back to Esther Alexis, Body of an Extravert. Today I am joined by the woman who had no idea she encouraged me to put in my 2-week resignation that same day, Brittany Janay Kess. She said, whoa. She said she's impulsive. I didn't. She's impulsive.
Not at all. Not at all. Okay. Not at all.
Well, how are you, Brittany?
So first of all, so you are not impulsive.
Okay.
I'm gonna reframe that.
Okay.
You are discerning.
You are discerning. That. Tell my parents this. Tell my parents
you
this.
You are discerning, and I appreciate you for just like sharing like the impact. I don't take that lightly. I'm feeling rested.
Good.
And so this weekend, my husband and I did like a baby moon, a local staycation.
Okay.
Baby moon to kind of just like prepare ourselves for this life transition.
Are y'all excited?
We're excited. Okay. I'm going to be honest. I'm excited. There's like a range of emotions that I think has come with this season of being a vessel, a portal. Okay. One of the feeling words are excited.
Okay.
She is, and we can actually talk about this, certainly a manifestation.
Wow.
A manifestation of just a lot of growth, reflecting, like healing.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So then you're ready for this.
I'm ready for this.
I feel like you already have kids. I feel like you're already a mother here. So this is child number.
So I have Braxton.
Okay.
Braxton is my 6-year-old son.
Okay.
My husband and I have a blended family.
Okay.
And so there's also Trinity, who is 13, Jason, who is 18.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So this is going to be beautiful. So 18, and then you said, I'm going to just reset the clock. She said, throw it back. I'm going to just do it all over again.
Technically, so because we're blended, my husband is really the one resetting. So so Braxton and this little one will only be 6 years apart. Okay. But my husband's youngest is 13, and so he's absolutely starting over.
More power to y'all. I'm not a mother, but I'm like, y'all just... Lately, I've been in awe of mothers. Like, I've started working out with mothers and, like, just working alongside mothers. And I'm like, y'all are just doing everything? Like, y'all just wake up like, I'm not only going to be a mom, I'm going to be a director of dei&j, I'm going to be CEO, I'm going to pick her up after school, I'm going to hit the gym, I'm going to go home, make dinner. And I'm like, and then y'all rest? You come to rest? So I love that you're feeling very rested and like prepared for this experience.
I appreciate that.
And I earnestly pray it's going to be something beautiful. And I pray that you have a very safe delivery, by the way.
I receive it.
I'm glad. I'm very, very glad. So we are here today in the state of Baltimore, the state of Maryland. And I'm so glad that we came down here. And if you guys don't know, we are using Faven Creative Studios. It is Black owned. It is woman owned. If you're going to be in the area doing content, please feel free to come and check it out and support Kelly Finch and her business.
Yes.
And so the reason I've asked Brittany here today is because when I was preparing, like for a very long time, I knew I was not in the right place in my job. But when I had come back from getting my MBA, I was like, they offered me a job. The bills will be paid. I'm just going to go. This is the calling, you know? And I felt like for a very long time, I was like, this can't be it. Like, I very much believe in taking a holistic approach to life. Like, it can't just be that I show up at work one way and then at home another way. And then I was like, I really need to be in an environment where I can show up as myself all the time. And I just didn't feel like I could do that at my job. It's not necessarily a dig towards them. I just felt in that position, I just didn't have the ability to do that. And then you put on this presentation which was remembering as an act of liberation. And I'm going to be honest, the first time I heard it, I was like, it's Black History Month. They're going to bring up the trauma. I was like, you know what it is? Because they always go, let's remember it. And then they go, and here's a picture of everyone getting beat. Here is this. You know, I hope that this reminds you. And I'm like, remind me of what per se? Like what am I supposed to take from this? And so I was very hesitant, I'm not gonna lie, to attend your presentation. But Camila, who was a new DE&I director, and she's amazing. She was like, you need to attend this. Like, you're going to love her. And I was like, yeah, okay. She was like, Esther, no, you specifically, you're going to love her. And I was like, I got some time. I'll just pop on the headphones and type away. Like, I was
Were you there for like the tech issues and stuff too?
I sure was. And I wish they would ask. Like, I'm in HR, but I'm in systems, so I know how these things go. And I'm like, please, for the love of God, like, ask somebody in systems or in IT to help. I'm like, they always try to figure it out themselves. I don't understand that. I'm like, tap into your resources, network here, okay? Because I was on the line.
That was the whole vibe at the beginning. I was like, I hope I am able to get back settled.
No, you handled it like a boss, and they took like 10 minutes of your time, girl. And they were still like, we're gonna finish on time. I was like, don't y'all rush her now. I was like, if she
allow the spirit to move,
right? If it's gonna be moving in the sanctuary, don't take your time, Pastor. I was like, no, but they took a while there. But you came in, your voice was cool, calm, and delivered, and I was just like, okay, like, here she goes. And the minute you opened your mouth, you was like, I'm just going to go and introduce myself. And you go, and I want y'all to know, when I say introduce myself, I'm not talking about, you know, like my accolades and all these things. You said, I'm talking about like who I am. Because I think a lot of the times we relate to what, like the things we've done, and we present that as who we are. And she's like, and you go, that's not who we are. And immediately I said, and this work can wait. And I was like, I
love this commentary, because I'm always curious, right? I am always curious how, especially in the virtual setting, just like how folks are just experiencing the message, like the vibe, if it's resonating. And so as you sit here, I'm like, yes,
girl,
yes.
I was like, I'm not even gonna lie, during the tech issues, I said, this ain't it, Lord. I said, if this was the message, I said, And she said, that's just not who we are. And I said, Brittany, tell us who we are. I was like, tell us who you are. Let's start with that.
Yeah. And so I oftentimes share that the question, like, who are you? Tell me a little bit more about yourself. For me, my capacity to like even answer that, I use that as just like a gauge for like my presence in the season, because it is so much more than what I may be working on, what job I may be in that season. And so today, in this moment, when I think about who is Brittany Janay, I am a vessel. I am a vessel. Today I am a vessel. I feel like trusted by God and our ancestors as I prepare to give birth. I am being really intentional about alignment with my values and how I serve in different capacities. I am recovering like overthinker. And my reframe for that is a perpetual wonderer. And so I just be having a lot of questions, Esther. Like I have a lot of questions for myself, certainly for others, for systems, institutions, right? I am a Black woman, mother, wife. I am remembering what it means to just like rest and care for myself, even in seasons of transition and a lot going on this. I am experiencing heightened sort of like instances of joy juxtaposed with like what feels like a lot of grief.
Yeah.
And so that's been something I've been like contending with in this season, like just like how, not necessarily to make sense of it, but really curious about what I am intended to like learn and like embody as a result of it. I am a practitioner, and so creator of Liberated Love Notes, lover of Black people, Black culture. I am a creative and curator of space, and I credit my grandmother for that. I've been thinking about just how, and I may have shared this in the presentation, how so much of who I am is not just those things I'm experiencing in the present, but certainly those inheritances of the past. And so I think about my grandmother, Lucille, who's like able to do the most dynamic things with her hands and has always been like a curator of just like space and community and come over, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and you like just feel the love. I feel blessed to inherit that. As when people say, oh, you're so creative, you're so brilliant. I'm like, Lucille taught me.
Oh my God.
I am a product of just like a whole bunch of love. And I'm noticing how that shows up just like in my work. Yeah. And even as a equity, justice, and inclusion practitioner, like how that shows up in my just orientation to the work, specifically as I transition from doing a lot of holding space and facilitation, like for white folks and their curiosities and wanting to become anti-racist and all the things, to really transitioning into this intentional body of work where I was creating space for us, Black folks, to affirm each other, certainly learn, but also like unlearn some of the stuff that we've been socialized to believe about ourselves, each other, systems, and community. But then also like space to like reimagine and like redefine like what could be. Yeah, that's who I am. And a little bit of like what I'm doing in this season. I am excited to be here. I'm really excited to be here.
And I think it's like, it's really, because you've done this twice now, like every time you say like, this is who I am, like none of it is like, oh, like I am the head of, I am, my degrees. And it's funny because like before that presentation, like whenever anyone asks me where I am, like who I am, oh, it's like, I'm Esther Charles, like I am BA, like I have 4 business degrees and I have XYZ.
Yeah.
And I think for like a lot of us, like we are the physical things. Like, and I feel like what I have taken away even from this is like, but we're not those things. Like,
we're more than those things.
Right. And I'm like, I mean, they're a part of us, but I'm like, if anyone can take them away, then were they really yours to begin with, And so I'm like, what your grandmother passed on to you is not something, an experience can't be taken from you. You understand? Like, if you've learned it, if it's intuitive in you now, it can't be taken. And I think that so many of us are so easily robbed of our joy, of what we think is our joy, of our successes, of our wealth, right? Because I consider knowledge to be wealth, We're robbed of that when others don't acknowledge that in us. But again, if it's something inherent, it can't be taken.
And that we experience clarity around it. Like that. And that was one of the... literally an affirmation like I wrote to myself. And so a little origin story behind how I have, learned, or I guess relearned to introduce myself. I want to say 2020. In 2020. And so I'm working in a capacity, don't get me wrong, that I love, right? I am making a salary that, by all accounts, right, was like a metric or a primary metric of success.
Yeah, girl. When I left my salary behind, I was like, Brittany know what I make? I was like, because I pay the bills, Britt, and I live. I said,
I was doing work that was so intricately connected to my identity. So good work. But one of the intrapersonal reckonings that I had was this, you know what? I'm much more than this. I am not my work. I am not my work. In as much as I may love what I do, in as much as I may experience purpose in what I do, it is not all like who I am. And I recall a time where, similar to you, I only knew myself through my title. Brittany J. Harris, Vice President of, you know what I mean? Yeah. And I to some extent, I think the reason why 2020 was so significant is because that context was the racial reckoning. So that I'm working in like DEI. And so everybody and their mom was wanting to engage in the work. And if I'm being honest, I was experiencing a certain degree of like burnout, right? And so, and as much as the world was pausing or whatever we want to call it, I was experiencing a certain degree of burnout and felt guilty about it. You know what I mean? Like felt guilty, like how could I, if this is my purpose or if this is work that's so connected to who I am, like I shouldn't mind doing this. You know what I mean? Like I shouldn't feel like I need a break. I think about colloquialisms like if it's your purpose, it won't feel like work.
You'll never work again.
Yes.
Are they lying?
Yes.
They are
and just
lying.
how detrimental that can be because when we start to feel like, I need to pause or I need a break, we're now negotiating whether or not I was then negotiating whether or not I was deserving of it. I also just think about how in that season, I was feeling in my spirit. So that's why I say you weren't impulsive. You were discerning. I was feeling in my spirit this need to shift. But was such a core piece of who I was. And so there was like some apprehension and fear. Will people still see me as like, I don't know, worthy of like, will I still be seen as someone of a certain regard? Like, will people look at me any differently because I don't have this title? Those are the questions like I started to like ask myself and realize that, this is not just by coincidence, right? None of this is necessarily like inherent to who we are, but we absolutely exist in a system of colonialism and anti-Blackness where we've learned that, hey, I am only worthy if, or the extent to which I'm worthy is the extent to which I can produce or serve others. And so if you ain't doing nothing, then you ain't, and how limiting that is, how harmful that is. And so when I wrote myself the affirmation, I am not my work, I started to get really curious about, then who the hell, like, who am I then?
What am I?
Who am I?
Doing when I'm not working, producing, being successful.
And so I drew a tree, Esther, and I wish I had it here. I don't think I shared it in this presentation, but I had drew a tree. It's in my journal. And I drew the roots, the trunk, and like branches and leaves. And I started with the roots and I wrote down words that came to me as it related to, what keeps me rooted? Like what keeps me like grounded? My values, my sort of generational or intergenerational gifts and rememberings, my spirituality and my faith. And then I drew the trunk and I wrote like purpose. Wow, like how do these things like connect me to the like outside world and like nourish what shows up in the branches and the leaves, whether it's hobbies, whether it's my job, whether it's other ways I show up in community. And I thought to myself, like how limiting it would be if I looked at this picture and said, oh, that's a leaf. Yeah. You know what I mean? When the leaf is just one element of the tree. Oh, that's a branch. Yeah. It's a tree, right? And I have sort of used that as in the spirit of remembering, just like as an ongoing, like remembering for me. What is it that keeps me rooted? What is it that keeps me sort of like clear, brings clarity when I should move, when I should shift? Even as it relates to just job transitions, one of the things, and shout out to my therapist for this, one of the things that I remember doing before I decided to transition was an activity where I listed all of my values. And so the beauty in I am not my work was when I started to truly embody that, I stopped making decisions from like a place of validation and like from a place of actual values alignment, right? Which is so different. And so I wrote down like, here are my values. In what ways is this space values affirming? And in what ways is this space or work values violating? And like, how do I then use that? So I'm not just salary, right? It can't those can't be the primary ways in which we just sort of see ourselves and make decisions. And I'm not saying they're not important, but it can't be primary. And for me, it wasn't primary. So that's a little origin story around even just how I had come to respond to the question, like, who are you? Yeah.
I love that because it's actually funny. My friend is literally a social worker. Ironically, it seems all my friends are social workers and nurses. Like they work with Margaret's a social worker. And it's funny because I chose to go corporate. So I very much like I was like and to give my background, like my parents, like they're immigrants from Haiti. Like my parents are very religious people. Grew us up in that faith-based community and whatnot. And for a very long time, I chose when I did business and I thought it was values affirming. I was like human resources. I was like, there's no greater place to be in business. It's where kindness has to be in business, you know? Girl, no.
I was about to say.
No. And it's kind of like I thought I could force my values, right?
Yeah.
To exist in my day-to-day job. And at some point I had to realize like violation after violation after violation of like just who I felt I was. I was like, at what point do I shift? And I brought up my friend because she's looking to change her work in social work. And she's saying that it's such a big part of who she's always known her whole life she was going to be a social worker. And so she was like, if this is not it for me, like if I can't exist in this particular place in social work, how do I move? When do I know? And I think that a lot of the times people are confused when you say like, how do you find a place that is values affirming? Because at the door, everyone, even like, you know how they say that you're dating someone's representative? When it comes to corporate, when it comes to job, you're seeing their representative. And so I guess my question is, when you are balancing the scales of just, you know, where are my values being validated here? Or are they being violated? Because there's no such thing as perfection. How do you move? Like, and at what point, because I think that's something that we also do is we lie to ourselves, similar to what I think I've done, which is, but I can change it here. Like I can make my values a value.
Ooh, yeah.
Liberated love.
I have a liberated love note for that. I wrote an affirmation related to that. And I think about how, and you may feel this way as it relates to human resources too. Naturally, there are certain professions where there is like personal connection. There's like there are these like altruistic, values driven intentions, at least. Let's just say that, intentions. And because we exist in imperfect but very deliberate systems, a lot of times there is misalignment in what we sort of assume should be happening or how this work should look, like versus how it like plays out. One of my values at the top of 2021 was clarity. God and ancestors, please grant me the clarity to fully fully honor, yes, the depth of my power, but also the limitations that exist because of things that are beyond me.
My control, yeah.
Yes, it's clarity. Just because even in the context, I'll say, of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice work, one of the things I had to contend with was, yes, to continuing to use myself and like my voice and my gifts in service of moving this work forward, and recognizing when having the clarity to decipher between like what is my work and like what is within my capacity and what is not my work, and not to internalize that gap as deficiency in me.
Oh, wow.
Right? Because I do feel like I remember a point where 2020, 2021, I started to get very discouraged because I'm like, we are literally getting killed. And it's on our TV screen, social media feeds, and you have me out in these streets training people. You know what I mean?
Like I got unity. And even in the workplace, girl.
So that was like a tension. So I will say, and this is where I think that you have to be clear on where you can shift, because I recall a time where I created some boundaries around the work I would do. And so, if I'm going to be facilitating, if I'm going to be like designing curriculum, then it ain't just going to be about unity. Like, that's boundaries. Like, in my practice, I had to create a boundary that if I am going to do this and facilitate this, I would not do so and center the comfort of white folks, right? That is a boundary that I am setting, right?
Yeah.
Because of my values. If I'm going to come into spaces, I'm going to be very intentional about what I wear so that it can be discomfort, you know what I mean? So that I'm now using my body. Like, that was an act of agency. Like, how do I use, like, very tangibly my body, my voice, like my approach to fill the gap between how the work typically plays out and how I believe like it should, even if it wasn't perfect. And so I do think that going into any system, we have to experience clarity around like, one, where we experience power and agency and even like the incremental shifts. Clarity, two, just the limitations of the system. And then like clarity, three, when will enough be enough? You know what I mean? Like, when or what will be my marker for this is no longer like my work. And so I was trying to find a affirmation here, because I remember writing one.
And I feel like it's very important that when she says that she has liberated love notes, like, this is her actual company, y'all. And it's literal love notes for yourself. Like, when you're in the office, like, I feel like, especially for my social work friends, my nursing friends, anyone who's working as like a Black human being, like, these love notes, like, to yourself, to remind yourself in that morning, like, you get to be human at work.
And I'll be, just to give you, here it is. I pulled out a few of them because I feel like they're connected. Just to give you some context on liberated love notes, these literally started out as affirmations to myself and my husband, who at the time was working in law enforcement. So a Black man working in law enforcement, contending with the fact that he is existing in a system that has perpetually caused harm within community. My father, who at the time was working in a very just like toxic corporate, your typical, corporate America environment. And me feeling as though that there's so much effort around getting white folks like together and woke that we're not tending to just like the spirit and needs
and
of
the healing, the well-being that needs to be
affirmed.
affirmed.
Yes. And I'll just share that when I conceived liberated love notes, was very clear that these are for Black people, like unapologetically, not people of color, not right. Like, these are very much so written from the experiences and strive to center the experiences of Black folks at various intersections. And I think that's worth naming, because even in the context of the awakening and the reckoning, there was still like this inclination, and there is still even some discomfort around just saying Black people, Black folks. This is for Black people. It's for Black like people. This is not BIPOC. This is not. Okay. This is a byproduct of my love for Black folks. And so this one, just as it relates to transitions and clarity around when it's time, this one reads, I am mindful enough to recognize that change takes time. However, I do not need to bear the burden of waiting. I do not feel compelled to stay in environments, nor do I feel bad for leaving environments that do not serve my humanity and who I am. And so this one was significant because one of the things I had to unlearn was this obligation to see it all the way through, which really like compromises or undermines the value in perhaps just being there to sow a seed. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Maybe my role in this moment is to sow a seed, tend to the grounds. Somebody else will be there to bear witness to the fruit and the tree, but it is not necessarily my obligation, especially when there is an affront or a detriment to, my humanity. And I don't think it is by happenstance that as Black women, it can feel like we carry this burden to not just sow the seed or to plant the seed, but also tend to the garden, right? You know what I mean? Come back in, water it, and then see it all the way through. This wanting to embody this martyr or be this martyr. Which, if we unpack it even further, suggests that we need to be the one, which is not even how we are inherently as a collective and a communal people. That's not even like really true to us. And so this was one that I wrote and remind myself and others often, just as it relates to being discerning and experiencing clarity around, okay, if I am in this system and space, when will I know? How will I hold myself accountable to knowing when it's time to transition? And experience that transition not as a failure or as like a giving up, but as what it is, part of the cycle of transition, like onto either expanding impact in other ways, onto rest, you know what I mean? Onto just greater value alignment, right? All of those things. So this one is one that came up. And then something else you asked me, and I was like, let me pull this out. Here it is. As it relates to just what it means to be a Black body existing in white institutions. Here's another one that I wrote. My worth and legitimacy are not dictated by white institutions. My allegiance is and will always be to community, the Black community, even when I am working within the context of white systems. And so when I think about what it means to exist in systems that may not be fully values aligned, one of the things I am always mindful of is, okay, well, if I'm going to be here, how do I use my proximity to power and resources to support my values? And then for me, that is, how do I use my values, resources, proximity to power to affirm, Blackness, to create systems and policies that are mindful of or that center Black humanity? You know what I mean? Whether that is in how I am, you talked about HR, going about recruitment, how I am creating a space for community to happen or to exist, whether it's in like, employee resource groups or the like. If I got a budget, how am I connecting to Black owned vendors and businesses and putting them on and not feeling like, I got to feel bad about that. Right. So I think there are absolutely, it would be unrealistic to say that everyone has, the opportunity or has had the opportunity to be in spaces that are fully values aligned from a place of like perfection. I don't know how realistic that is. And I think we have an obligation to identify ways in which we can make values aligned decisions and use our power while we exist in those spaces. Yeah.
See, like, I love that. I genuinely love that. And I think like even when you walked in here, but I'm like, how do you even get there? Like, how in that mindset, like, I wonder, like, what did Brittany have to do
to get here?
Yeah. Like, because I think that even as we have these conversations, like, this to me is like everything. I love these kinds of conversations. But I think that I would love to also give a path to someone to like wake up and be like, how can I do that? And I'm like, in your everyday, absolutely. Like, just ask yourself. But I'm like, what did you have to do to get here? Like, did you like, because there wasn't a DE&I major in my time. So I'm assuming
there wasn't. How you know? Yeah.
Yeah, like,
that's so real. So part of it, I'm thinking about like lineage in general. And that's when we've referenced a few times the presentation from the place you were working and remembering as an act of liberation. I don't know if you noticed, but at the end, it ended up being an acronym for lineage. Remembering involves like remembering lineage, remembering our collective why. So that was O. Lineage, our collective why, values, and excellence. And so redefining excellence. I invited this reframe from like Black excellence to just like inherent Black brilliance. I'm sharing that because the L, lineage, is what comes up for me when you ask that question, like, well, how did you get here? And so, yes, some of it was, I guess, academic, but it wouldn't be fair nor like values aligned for me to limit my answer to that. And so I think on one hand, one of the things I benefited from as a child was just like a culturally affirming home. And so I share that because sometimes our power looks like the spaces that we create at home for our families. So I just want to start there, like, yes to these workplaces.
Yes.
And like, what does liberation look like at home, and with your family? What do culturally affirming spaces look like with your family? So I grew up in a home where my father was very sure just about the beauty of like Blackness and like Black history, and he buy me all the like books, or like I was into poetry books, and so he buy me like poetry books like affirming like Black women. He was also the kind of father who, or is, because he's still here, that was okay with me asking questions. And so I remember, and this feels connected to this discussion, grew up in a very typical like Black Christian family. And my grandmother and my grandfather, they heavy in the church, but they were also experiencing some like the real impact of racist economic injustice. And I remember asking my father, without feeling bad or feeling convicted, I said, how can they serve like a God who like allows them to experience this much bad stuff? I remember asking that question.
Girl, how old were you? Because that would have sent me flying through the kitchen door. You said what?
Right. And so that's what I mean by like, that was very, like the fact that I could even ask that question. I remember asking that. Like, how can they serve? And I remember my father referencing, and this is why I always share that I also come from Elmer's really big faith. And he said, your grandparents have this like faith, like experience this faith that is so beyond like this world. Like it was just such a simple answer, but the fact that I could ask it. And so a lot of how I show up today is a byproduct of, one, being in a culturally affirming home, but then also being invited to like ask the tough questions. And as adults, certainly as Black folks, I think we have to like relearn that. You know what I mean? Because I say it so. You know, think about like because I say it so, and how like asking why has sometimes been associated with like disrespect.
Absolutely. Yes,
but like we actually have to relearn asking why. So that's the first thing. Like, well, the second thing, culturally affirming spaces, but then also like learning to ask ourselves like, why do I actually think this way? Like, why am I defining success like this? Like, where did it come from? Why am I valuing certain Black bodies over others? Like, where did that come from? You know what I mean? Like really getting curious about what I perceived as the norm is sort of like one of the ways in which I got here. I think another thing, so I went to Howard for undergrad. And so,
lucky. You're so lucky. I wanted to go to Howard so hard.
I went to Howard for undergrad, and yes, it is the Mecca. Yes, it is a Black affirming space. Yes, I'm team HBCU and all the things. And we are not above reproach. And so one of the things I did notice, even in Black spaces, was the ways in which, you know, other systems, forms of oppression showed up, whether it was classism, and so like how we referred to quote unquote the locals and like people who lived in the community but weren't necessarily at the school. I was like really curious about that. Like, something about that just don't feel right. Where does that come from? Even, you know, in Black affirming spaces, there can be this inclination to, you know, right after college, get a job. You know what I mean? Like corporate America, all these career fairs. Yep. Just like, why is that? And so now that I think about it, in as much as, yes, I valued being in the space where Blackness was the default, I think it was also an invitation for me to think about how this stuff shows up when white folks ain't even in the room. You know what I mean? Like, and that's the kind of stuff we got to be asking ourselves. No, what is showing up even when certainly whiteness and the byproduct of anti-Blackness and whiteness shows up in cultural norms, but like literally getting curious about all that we are tracking, affirming, lifting up as the norm in our own spaces. I think that's so important. I've noticed that even when I facilitate spaces that are with like Black employee resource groups or in community, it's really hard for us to like center ourselves. Like it's really hard for us to move beyond like the white gaze, you know? I love, there's a video, the pieces of me, Toni Morrison, where she talks about the day she knocked off. Toni Morrison love and is a possibility model, y'all, for what it means to move beyond the white gaze in our work. She references this white man who is on our shoulder constantly. And the freedom she experienced the day she like plucked them off, where she stopped thinking about the world through the lens of, you know, whiteness and like white comfort. And I think that is something we have to commit to doing. I recognize that practically that may feel like it creates some risk, and also feels like, and at least in my experience, that level of like resistance starts to feel restorative. You know what I mean? Like it really starts to feel like an act of self-care every time I like buck, like even in the like incremental of ways. And so like, back to your question of like, well, why do you even get here? The culturally affirming spaces, the asking of questions, the getting really curious about how systems of oppression are showing up in our spaces, and then also committing to, even in the incremental ways, like committing to like resisting the white gaze. That requires, though, I will say, and this is a practical, that requires us to be intentional about where we're getting our information from. You know, because the white gaze starts in what we read, what we watch, what we consume. And so I developed a practice, especially in the context of my work, and so diversity, equity, and inclusion work. I refuse to limit my consumption to the Harvard Business Review and the Deloittes and the McKinseys and all of these institutions and resources that are developed by white institutions, and started to get really curious, remembering, right, about Black thought leadership, like centering that in my work. I may have referenced that, and your social work friends may appreciate this, that one of the bodies of work that really shifted my perspective as not just a practitioner, but just as a Black person, was Dr. Joanne and Elmer Martin's Spirituality in the Black Helping Tradition. So that's a book, and just a quick fact, Dr. Joanne Martin and her late husband, Dr. Elmer Martin, are the founders of the Great Blacks in Wax Museum here in Baltimore. Wow. But they have also curated this beautiful body of work around Black gifts, Black spirituality, specifically as it shows up in the social work profession. But I found it valuable. I found it or experienced it as a remembering of just like all the beautiful ways that we can show up in any practice, right? And get connected back to our spiritual selves. That ain't something you can find. You know what I mean? Deloitte's not talking about, they're not checking for embodiment and getting attuned to yourself beyond oppression, beyond racialized trauma and all. They're not checking for any of that. And so it does take a certain degree of intentionality to center and like get familiar with Black thought leadership. Here in Baltimore, have had the pleasure of learning from communities like Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle. And so they actually put out probably right after the pandemic, a experience around just like African-centered methodologies, like ways of being and ways of practice, specifically in the human services sector. But I've been able to like just transfer that into some of, you know, my work. That's important. You know what I mean? Like you really have to expose. I used to literally go on YouTube as a care practice and just listen to conversations between James Baldwin and Nikki Giovanni. You know, just listen. Yeah. None of this is new that we're experiencing, right? None of this is new to the Black experience. And so, in the spirit of remembering, like, that very practically is like part of the like how I get here. So yeah, like culturally affirming spaces. People who are caregivers, I hope, experience that as like responsibility, because you can get real lost in these, I want my child to go to the best school streets, and then be perpetuating racialized trauma in your child's very young brain, and that's not cool. You know what I mean? Like you want them to go to the best schools, but they're the only one. And then if we can't even do that in corporate, imagine what our kids are experiencing in elementary school. I don't like that.
Margaret went to the same school. We went to the same high school. It was predominantly white. That was our whole. And then I went to a college because my parents were like, you can go on the college tours. And then I was like, I want to go to this school. And they were like, actually, no. This is the best school. And they're giving you a full ride, baby. So that's where you're going to go. No, I know. But when you're young, you're like, no, I'm trying to. Because I've been in white areas my whole life.
Gotcha.
And I was like, no. I'm going to the Blacks. I'm going. My dad was like, I'm not paying for that. I'm not paying for that trip to the Blacks. And I was like, and I'll be here. No, but that is, I think that's a really big thing. And I think that one thing that I want to harp on is, I guess, curiosity, right? Like, I think you being a curious person and you having the safe space to ask why. And then because of that leading to, I can continue to explore and educate myself in different ways. I think that that's fundamentally like, that's a huge one as to how you get here. Because like, I think a lot of us, in this day and age, had to resolve the fact that not all of us came from homes where we could ask questions. Child, my parents love me, but let me tell you something about these Haitians. You're not asking a question. You're not. This is what I've said. And they have a platitude. It goes, it's school, church, home. Like that is the places a child is seen and supposed to be like heard, but not even really. So having, I guess, the courage to be like, I'm going to go and learn a different way now. And I'm going to resolve the fact that I couldn't do it here, but I can do it. I have the agency now to do it.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the part that we forget. I think that that's the part that I think I've forgotten for a very long time is I have the agency to learn elsewhere. And so thank you. Like, thank you for your agency and your teaching and for being a vessel, because you're more than just like a vessel, for life, which it's a beautiful thing. But like, I think that you I don't even think you realize, like, I think you're shaking stuff up. So thank you for being used and for joining us today. Is there anything that you wanted to plug, like, because y'all need to be buying the Liberated Love Notes, but is there anything else that you wanted like to plug just so that people are aware, whether it's other areas that they can continue to learn? I don't know necessarily in Connecticut if we have like a lot of Black areas where you can be like, let me just go in here and learn something. And we got to research. We'll do our research.
Right? And get
research.
in. So here's one of the things, and maybe I'll end with this, right? About a year ago, I had lunch with a colleague, someone who does a lot of work here in Baltimore, but we connected like via social. I think she may have bought Liberated Love Notes and was like, we got to have lunch, And she asked me a really powerful question that has stuck with me. And it was, what is your relationship to this place? And I remember thinking like, I've never been asked, like, I'm a lover of questions, and yet I've never been asked that question. And my response was, because this is the word literally that came to me, was return. Return. And I remember reflecting on the difference between being in a position where I'm gaining exposure and like access versus feeling grounded and like rooted somewhere. And I'm noticing that a lot of us may or experience range of relationship to place, like where we are. And social media complicates that because we can think we're connected in some ways that perhaps we are not. And so for me, I'm glad you mentioned, like, maybe I need to research, like, what's in my backyard. Sometimes the, like, allure, especially for folks who are in, quote unquote, like more professional roles, especially for folks who are trying to, focused on like maybe a ladder, who are transplants, moving on. A lot of this for me has come with this like return to Baltimore. And so really getting curious about like, what is here? You know what I mean? Like, what organizations are here? What are the lived experiences of those with whom are in, this community? What can I learn about, like, that is just like rich here? How do I use my gifts and my skills in some very deliberate ways here? Which requires intentionality, like you just mentioned, research, because we everywhere, right? We're right, and that's something that I'm gonna be honest, I was not as attuned to, because I was like having the privilege of speaking over there and over here and like over there, you know what I mean? Like working with this client, and I started to know, I was like, wow, it's one thing to be or to experience exposure. It's another thing to like really feel rooted and grounded somewhere. Right. And so I want to plug that, like wherever you are, because I've been a transplant before. And I remember a member of community, me trying to come in and do the work, holding me accountable and said, Britt, there's a difference between coming into a community and truly being of the community, right? Wow. And we should strive for the latter, like to be of the community, which means listening, getting to know, you know what I mean? Getting connected, and not to network, but just to be an authentic relationship.
I think we're very quick to go, like, for example, like even myself when I was like in college, to be like, I gotta go to Howard, like I gotta see what's there. But I'm also like, there are communities here, like even colleges, not an HBCU in Connecticut, but there are universities where there's big Black student life, and they're looking for things and stuff as well, and it's there. But if you're not pouring into it, who will? You know what I'm saying? It'll never be the place where another young Black person will be like, I gotta go there because I can do something there. I can contribute there. I can grow there.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really big deal, actually, is being where your feet are and investing there.
And that's and in the spirit of, like, we talked about the analogy of tending to soil. It's also a responsibility when I think about my maternal grandfather, who experienced Baltimore as refuge. And so he came here as a teenager, high school, not even, maybe like middle school education, if that, to get away from harm and a traumatic experience in North Carolina. And so built legacy here. I feel responsible to tend to that soil. You know, and just like a real deliberate, I feel in the spirit of return, right? I feel responsible to be connected and stay connected and use I went to Howard, but I came back, right? You know what I mean? And so I think there is something divine in that. Maybe you're not there the whole time, but what would it look like to return, or at least be deliberate about where you are, like your relationship to place wherever you are now, right?
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for joining us today. Y'all, please check out Brittany Janay Kess and her Liberated Love Notes and her podcast, which is on sabbatical right now.
Liberated Love Notes is on sabbatical, but they're there. So I feel like I should plug. It's like 41 episodes.
Girl, that's a lot of episodes.
I know.
I can do one a week, and the year, you know, take vacations, public holidays, and that's a full year. Come on now.
They're my reflections, affirmations. For us, by us. And hopefully my intention was for the episodes to be nourishing and sort of like top of week reminders, especially for those of us who are existing in systems that were not created for us in mind. And so Liberated Love Notes, the podcast, is still alive and well. And I'm on the socials. And so Instagram, Brittany Janay _ Liberated Love Notes. And the Liberated Love Notes are online.
Yes, please.
BrittanyJanay.com. And
So BrittanyJanay.com. So they're not on like the Amazon or anything?
They're not on Amazon.
So we're going to make sure to link this.
Yeah.
We'll link it so that they can get it. Because I don't know, I'll be on Amazon.
But I will say my SEO is on point. So like if you Google Liberated Love Notes, it's actually going to take you to the site. It's going to take you right to the site.
Margaret's like, I can confirm. I can confirm I am there.
I said yes. So that was the fruit of labor there. That was the fruit of some love and labor there, that it actually comes up when people type in.
Good, girl, because I'm sure they type in Esther Alexis and they'd be like, Esther who? Like, that could be anybody.
This is just the beginning.
Girl, this is just the beginning. And hopefully one day I'll be returning here. Yes. You know, we'll see. But thank you so much for joining us, y'all. Be sure to let us know how you feel in the comments. If you haven't already, feel free to like, share, and subscribe. And share with a friend. Tell a friend to tell a friend. Please, y'all, get your educations here. Get your learnings here. And tend to your soil here. I like that. I really like that. But thank you for joining us.
Thank
Brittany.
you. I'll see you later.